Now there's all kinds of different people in this world. There's only one pie.
Welcome to the Team Made Apart podcast, the podcast designed to teach freelancers, contractors, and remote workers, really anyone working apart, how to build better relationships with those they work with and those they work for. I'm your host, Ryan Rogar. Before we get started, financial support for the Team Made Apart podcast is provided by R2, a fully distributed brand relationship consultancy. R2 has specific expertise and experience in helping service companies grow, develop, and maintain impactful relationships through world-class brand strategy and design. R2 supports the world's best distributed companies by providing valuable insights, strategy, empathy, and tactical expertise to help them foster truly meaningful relationships from top management to top consumer. If the success of your business depends on the relationships you make, then you need R2. To learn more or to request a call, simply visit r2mg.com/podcast. That's r2mg.com/podcast. R2, relationships squared. Also, financial support comes from teammadeapart.com. Leveraging 20 plus years of global agency and creative hiring expertise, Team Made Apart provides distributed organizations with access to the best and brightest creative talent from around the world. Through deep understanding of client needs and meaningful relationships with talent, Team Made Apart facilitates a sort of virtual handshake between prospective employer and prospective employee to reduce risk and eliminate doubt from creative hiring decisions. Take a step towards filling that creative-shaped void in your distributed team by visiting teammadeapart.com/talent. That's teammadeapart.com/talent to learn more. Finally, financial support comes from supporters like you. Members of our Happy Little Podcast community can make contributions directly to the show by visiting teammadeapart.com/podcast and clicking on the donation link. Donations can be made in any amount and would go a long way towards keeping this show on the air. If you appreciate the work we're doing and would like to get involved, just visit teammadeapart.com/podcast, click the donate button, and you're on your way. Thanks in advance for your continued support. And now, on to the show. Hey there, and welcome back to the Team Made Apart podcast. This week's special guest is Head of Business Development at Doist and host of the About Abroad podcast, Chase Warrington. After calling half a dozen countries home, Chase, an American expat now living in Spain, is well known for his passion for making location independence the new norm and helping others step into a life beyond their borders. He is a significant contributor to nearly every major remote-centric publication, podcast, and blog, and can often be seen collaborating with some of the most prominent companies in the remote work space. Chase joins us today for a discussion about the role remote leaders play in protecting the mental health of their teams, how distributed team members can set themselves up for success when working from home or anywhere, now and as we move beyond the pandemic, making a case for remote as the world returns to the office, and so much more. Please join me in welcoming to the show, Chase Warrington. How's it going, Chase? Welcome to the show.
Ryan, thanks so much for having me, man. This is going to be a lot of fun. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thrilled to catch up. And for people who are listening, Chase and I connected. He was actually one of the first people in sort of, I guess, what we would call the remote work world to sort of take my call when I was still trying to figure out what I was doing in the space. And arguably, I'm still trying to figure out what I'm doing in this space. But
we all are.
Yeah, but luckily we have some friends along the way that we've met. And so anyway, Chase is one of those guys. I'm grateful for your time, man.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, same. I think we're all, it's sort of a new space, and it's interesting to see it developing so fast in a lot of ways. And we're all sort of wading our way through it and figuring out how we can contribute and kind of assist each other in this knowledge sharing. So I'm grateful for what you're doing as well, and happy to be here.
Yeah, no, I think it's one of these things, right? That for most people who were sort of, I guess, advocating for remote work before the pandemic, many people got sort of, I guess, cornered into this situation where it was believed that a lot of remote work advocacy meant sort of all remote all the time, right? Mm-hmm. Instead of this idea of flexibility and other things like that. And then when remote was sort of forced on everybody, I remember seeing a lot of like blog posts and things like that. Like, I hope you're happy, remote advocates, you finally got your wish. And almost everybody I know who's sort of advocating for, different types of work or flexible work was, totally appalled by this idea. The whole idea is that, no, it's about flexibility. It's not about remote, being remote all the time or forcing people to do this and that. So it's kind of interesting that, on its face, or to people who are sort of, or unfamiliar with the situation, they sort of assumed that everybody would just be thrilled. But I don't think anybody would have really wished for remote this way.
No, it's like a very nice, clear distinction to make between pandemic remote and like real remote. And those of us, I mean, even like at Doist, we're a seasoned remote first company with 100 people in 30 something different countries. We've been doing this for 12 years. And so we kind of know a thing or two about how to make remote work. And through the pandemic, people were really struggling. I mean, we came across all kinds of unforeseen issues that we at first we thought, well, we've got this nailed. We don't really have to skip a beat. We'll just keep working how we normally have. But we absolutely did have to adjust because it's just a different ball game and a totally different set of standards from a management standpoint, from a productivity standpoint, from a mental health standpoint. So it changed the game completely. And so, anybody that was saying like, you got what you wanted, this was not what we wanted. But I think what we'll come out with in the end could be a really nice backup plan. And I think we'll all walk away having learned a lot.
Yeah, well, and I think that's a really great point that you make there, that even you guys as a very well-established, remote first organization, years into your work prior to the pandemic, the fact that there were still things for you to learn, I think is actually a tremendous point, because I see, at least with a number of businesses that I've been talking to, that have sort of, either had to wade into the water as far as remote goes, or dip a toe in, or maybe go full blast during the pandemic. For a lot of these companies, there's some insecurity built in, sort of to their leadership, where they don't know what they're doing. Are we doing this the right way, the wrong way, the whatever? And the fact that somebody or an organization like Doist, who's so already comfortable in that space, the fact that you guys still had to make some significant changes, or at least address things in different ways, I think might be encouraging to people who don't feel like they had all the answers.
Yeah, I hope it's a crystal clear message that we're sending. And when I talk to other people who are like, have been advocating for remote work in a much more in-depth way than I have, people that you've had on this podcast, episodes that I've listened to before, these people, that we're all in agreement, where we say like, that we need to make sure that people understand that that we're all learning through this. I mean, and that comes from a bunch of different angles. Like, one is that this, not only was it obviously a different situation and people were working in a different environment, people were homeschooling their kids, or they're taking care of parents, or people are out of work. There's more stress at home. You don't have anything else to do. I mean, there was a lot of different things of elements there to work through, but then also like, this changed the marketplace. All of a sudden, there's a ton of new tools out there catering to remote work, new platforms, knowledge sharing, and best practices are out there. So all of a sudden, there's more information to digest and to second guess. Well, wait, we've been doing this one way, but I see XYZ company over here doing it another way. That's actually better. Let's adopt that. And then it's just like drinking from a fire hose. There's so much information out there. So yeah, I mean, we're constantly evolving and trying to figure out how to do it at the most optimal level. And that goes for companies that are just starting to do it, transitioning, and those of us that have been doing it for a while.
Yeah. Well, and I think, again, that's a really refreshing take, because I think, even if the changes you were making maybe weren't necessarily heavy policy changes or something like that, like certainly you noticed a difference in the markets, you noticed a difference in your people, you noticed a difference in some of these other buckets. And so it made sense to make those changes. But what I love about the description you gave is, one, this openness to learning, right? Like, there's so many people, and I think, especially during a pandemic like COVID, but really even just a business emergency, sales are slumping and we might have to lay off or whatever. There's situations where, the people working in an organization might look up to leadership for the answers, right? And during something like a pandemic, we didn't have the answers. Nobody had the answers. And you could look to your leaders all you want, but your leaders are going through the same thing as you are. They have no idea what's happening, or how to respond, or what's the right thing. And, they're also, especially in many places around the world, a lot of political pressures and a lot of all kinds of other pressures going on that, it maybe exacerbated how bad the pandemic was in terms of, there's this emotional toll being taken by people who are suffering and people who are sick and people who are locked down or have lost loved ones. but there's also this emotional baggage around, just not knowing and being stuck in a situation where you're out of control. Because I think that ultimately that's what we're looking to do, right? Is have some kind of control of our lives. And during this time, pretty easy to feel like you didn't have any.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, most of what I advocate for around remote work is giving people the option and the flexibility. Like, I'm not against an office per se. I'm just kind of against like forcing people to go to this one place to do their work. And so that's all about options. And I just think you can do your best work from the place where you choose to do your best work. And that's different for everybody. So that's kind of like at the core of what I think remote work can do for people. There's a lot of different offshoots of that, but that's kind of like a cornerstone of the concept. And so that was all robbed from us during this time. And there weren't a lot of options. I was in Spain during a 3-month hardcore lockdown where like you just literally could not leave the house except to get groceries, and that was it. And so all of a sudden I was kind of thrown back into a situation where I was, as you said, like, supposed to be leading in a lot of ways, but I'm trying to figure out how to do this again and work at home with my wife working in the same space. And we're not used to that anymore. And then, not having any outlets to change things up, social outlets and travel outlet, other things. So yeah, we were trying to figure this out at the same time, and at all levels of leadership and Doist, we were recognizing this as we go. Like, we think we have this figured out, but actually we don't, and we need to reassess.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's right. So maybe we transition a little bit our conversation into what you guys were beginning to observe. So I happen to know, and I think in large part what spurred me reaching out to you in this particular moment about coming on the show was I had read a post on your LinkedIn profile, something to do with, an internal discussion that you guys are having at Doist in terms of an initiative to work towards, providing better mental health resources for your team. And I think that this is a challenge that a lot of people are going through. And, I think mental health can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. And very commonly in this space, anyway, you hear sort of the basics, the loneliness, the isolations, that kind of thing. But, and maybe those are the right answer. Maybe that is what it is. But I wonder if you sort of talk about what you guys were observing at Doist and sort of, what types of behaviors were you observing? And, how did you know when it was time to take action?
Yeah, it's a great question. And one thing that I love, and like, it comes back to the knowledge sharing, is like, it's very cool that, I shared something that we're doing internally that sparked an interest in you. And now we're sharing this with your audience. And I was inspired by somebody else who was talking about mental health at some point, and that kind of spawned me to want to make it more of a conversation. And so there's this like ripple effect of or especially I think around mental health, where this was not something that was talked about not that long ago. Like a couple of years ago, this was just not a subject that I heard a lot of conversation around internally at Doist or externally in this sort of network. And now I can see that it's becoming a much more prominent subject, which I think is really important. It's one of the things that you see referenced in just about any remote work survey that's done as one of the biggest challenges in some way or another. Maybe the word mental health isn't used, but anxiety, depression, loneliness, over-connectedness to your devices, and the always on mentality, never being able to get rid of work. Remote workers are generally living where they're working. And when those two spaces are combined, the lines between the two are very blurred. So this is a very common thing that people experience in remote work. And I think it's just not something that's been discussed a lot until recently. One of the perhaps pros of the pandemic is that it's really brought this to light. So we were starting to talk about mental health a lot I would say about 2 years ago. It started becoming more of like a subject. Like, let's take this a little seriously. We had a channel dedicated to it in Twist, which is like our version of Microsoft Teams or Slack. And so we had a channel dedicated to it. We had a small kind of like committee that formed ad hoc and started, sharing more information on this. We had some people write blog posts about their experiences fighting this, and really started taking it more seriously as a company. We allow people to use days, for instance, particularly during the pandemic. We got very liberal with like, hey, if you need a sick day, this is apart from your vacation time. Nobody wants to use their vacation time on a day when they're feeling sad. Like if you've got a limited number of vacation days, that doesn't make you feel good to use a vacation time. So we're very liberal with letting people say, if you're not feeling it today, you're having a rough week or whatever, you need to take some time to take care of yourself. And there's a lot of little ways that we try to show that, but I think we try to put a lot of emphasis on the empathy that we show to the team to say, you got to take care of you first. You can't show up to work as a C-level, of yourself. You've got to be in the best shape possible. So take care of yourself first. We'll be here. The work will be here, and that'll kind of take care of itself.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think what I really appreciate, and it's actually, not uncommon in sort of the remote work world among companies that are sort of remote first, is this idea of, having sort of a progressive mental health program. I think, when you work with a lot of remote workers, you do come across these sort of common problems, right? The isolations and things like that. So maybe you're not a stranger to them necessarily outside of all the extra pressures of the pandemic. But I mean, you at least had some wherewithal in prior years to start thinking about this stuff. And I think remote companies especially have a little bit of an advantage or sort of on the leading edge of that kind of stuff versus maybe your more traditional co-located office. So I think, that's obviously feeding this conversation. And I think the conversation will continue to grow among people who are newly remote or remote by choice or not by choice, depending on what happened in their situation. And, and I think just all these new voices coming to the table, talking about, what they're experiencing. And I think that's really great. I also think that these companies that are leading, and this is very common in a remote first company too, but this idea of transparency and just open and honesty and communication and things like that seems to be fostering this environment where you're safe to talk about how you feel. I mean, maybe, 10 years ago, maybe even not that long ago, in some organizations, if you were out sick, that was kind of a sign of weakness. Or if you weren't there, well, maybe the promotion goes to Jerry. Jerry never misses a day, or whatever it is. And I think that, while it's still important to be committed to your company and do the work you say you'll work, I think remote has it right in the way that they measure sort of output versus this idea of, number of hours clocked or that sort of thing. So I think that there's a lot of things that are happening in the remote world that as they now trickle down and maybe more aggressively trickle down now into sort of your traditional co-located companies, I think you're going to see some serious change.
Yeah, I think a couple things that you pointed out really perfectly there is like one is that when you bring in a lot of people from a lot of different backgrounds, you get input from how things are handled in different nationalities and different cultures. And I would venture to say, I'm not putting any not claiming this as a fact, but I have the perception, that situation you just described where like, oh, Jerry doesn't miss a day, like give the promotion to Jerry. We get awards for this growing up in the US, in America, it's like, you got the perfect attendance award. And, that we have fewer vacation days in general. And so, our company is represented by every third person's from a different culture, a different background, and they do things differently. So when you get this melting pot of ideas about how something like, for instance, mental health or days off around a mental health day or workload when you're just not feeling it are handled, there's room for flexibility and your eyes are kind of open to like, oh, okay, like that's how they handle it there. Actually, I see some benefit to that. And then the second thing is like, because we're remote, we put a lot of emphasis on asynchronous communication and we don't really track hours. We're more focused on the outputs and the and the kind of deliverables. So therefore, we're not really worried about it if somebody needs to miss a couple days here and there, or even take some significant time off. What we're worried about is the collective quality of work over a period of time, and that is served positively by someone who's in a positive mental health state over the long run. So I think it's just kind of like, because like it's not all because we're remote, but because we're remote, we have some advantages in being able to see it from this standpoint, I guess.
Yeah. And I imagine a lot of those will be the positives that do trickle back into your sort of co-located offices where they, are maybe doing some level of integration with remote, where people are maybe part-time or have the option to work from home certain days or whatever, even if they don't go full blast remote. I think those types of things will be the things that trickle down into those companies and probably serve them better. Yeah. One thing I wanted to ask you about, and this is something I play around with a lot, is sort of, employee role versus employer role in any kind of given situation. And especially as it pertains to mental health, I wonder if you have any take on what the sort of employee or employer role of, when is it time to step in on somebody's mental health versus, we should probably stay out of this. Like, it's not really our business. Right. I think some of it, I mean, at least in my perception, it seems like if the worker bee or the employee is willing to sort of talk openly about these problems, and they're doing so that somebody will hear and maybe hopefully help. But I do think that, there's obviously some legal fine lines and some other things like that, where you don't want to get too involved in somebody's business, yet you want to provide the proper resources or provide the proper help. And so I wonder if I don't know if you guys have run into a situation like this, but I wonder if you could give just even a hot take on what you think is sort of the role of the employer in our mental health versus how much we should be taking on ourselves.
That's a great question. My gut feeling on this is that it's our job as the leadership within a company, or if you're the owner of the company, to provide the team with the tools and the confidence and the open space to let them know that it's okay to take advantage of these. It's one thing to offer a perk or the time off to take care of your mental health. It's another thing to make sure that the environment allows for that person to actually want to take advantage of it and not feel guilty, not feel stupid, not feel like they're not going to get the promotion. And so to walk that walk and talk that talk are two different things. And so I think it's what leadership's role is in this is to create that space where people feel like they can talk about this. They won't get looked down upon, and to make sure that it's completely clear that we expect that they'll need to take advantage of this, and that they should when they need it. When I have one-on-ones with direct reports or somebody that I feel like is maybe struggling with some things a little bit like that, like I try to be, I want that to be crystal clear. Like, this is here for you and for your benefit, and we want you to take advantage of it. So again, like, prioritize yourself first.
Yeah.
I guess there is a fine line though. Like, it's a great point, because at some point, you have to let the adults be adults and take care of themselves. But sometimes you need to protect someone from themselves. So yeah, it's a really interesting perspective. Good question.
Hey, Chase. So I wondered if we could talk a little bit about what's going on at Doist. We spent a little bit of time talking about just sort of, general mental health things, how to be aware of people's needs, how to maybe assess whether or not we need to get involved. But I wondered if you could talk, and obviously, I mean, you can only talk what you can talk about, this is an internal company discussion, but I wonder if you can talk a little bit about just sort of the background on the initiative you guys are running at Doist, sort of what spurred it, why, and we've talked loosely about a few of these things, but I wonder if you can make more concrete what you guys are doing and how you're trying to, I guess, take care of the people that work for you.
Yeah, sure. So I think an important thing to point out is that I feel like we already had a pretty good environment for this. I've worked in a couple different places, and I've my work over the years has taken me to meet with hundreds and maybe even thousands of other businesses. And so I've seen a lot of different ways in which companies operate. And I feel really proud to be a part of Doist, because we were already taking this seriously, even if we weren't explicit about it being about mental health. The employees' well-being in general has always been very central to us. And I was just shocked when I came to Doist at how far the company leadership was willing to take that and to put individuals first. So before even really recognizing that, hey, mental health needs to be a thing, there was always sort of this kind of like deeply baked part of the company DNA that we need to take care of our people and we want them to be happy and healthy. And that goes down to like broad strokes, like, giving people plenty of time off and maternity leave and paternity leave and things like that, to like wellness perks where we give people, $50 a month to buy fruits and vegetables for their desk at home. So like, those things, and then everything in between. But where mental health started becoming more of like a specific topic was, and I'm going to reach back a little bit, and I might be getting a few details wrong, but in particular, we had one or two employees that kind of flagged this as something that, hey, I think we're not talking about this enough, and we're not really pointing this out enough. Me personally, this person who brought this up kind of said publicly, I'm struggling with some things. And when we would have retreats and get teams together, you would learn from your teammates that, hey, there's some worries here there's some imposter syndrome. There's some people who, even though we talk about disconnecting from work, there's people who are struggling with disconnecting. There's people who feel loneliness. And so all of these things were obviously exasperated by various lockdowns and quarantines and inability to travel and disconnect, and people leaning into work a lot during the pandemic as kind of an escape. But before that, we were starting to address it with just little things like having open conversations about this, dedicating a safe space for it, energizing it as a conversation with, from the top of the company down to the leaders of their various teams, saying, hey, make sure we address this with your team. Keep a very fine, keep a finger on the pulse, I guess would be the way to say it, like what's going on with your team from this perspective. Make sure they know they have the resources available to them to get help if needed. We have like a set amount of perk money, we call it, that you get every month, which you can use towards a variety of things, from a co-working space to healthy food to gym memberships, lots of stuff. And that can be utilized for therapy, for instance. Certainly taking time, like for instance, we have a mentality around meetings that allows people to opt out of meetings when we rarely have them anyways. But like a totally valid reason to miss a meeting is for having, if you have a therapy session, or even if that's meditation or yoga or something that helps your mental health, we see it all as very valid. And so there's lots of little things like that. And the truth is, I think we can still do a lot better. We're evolving in this way as well and taking this more and more seriously. And I think there's even more work that we can do in this area. But I'm proud of the baby steps that we've made, and the place from which we started, I think, was already a pretty good jumping off point.
Yeah, I love that. And I love sort of Doist leading by example like that. I referenced earlier the LinkedIn post that sort of spurred this conversation. I just wanted to talk one more thing about that. You shared at the time something, I think, from your guys' Twist platform, a post that somebody had made that was a team check-in, and somebody that worked with you had put together this long list of sort of mental health concerns. And, it had put together sort of this self-assessment. And what I love about this thing, and the fact that you guys are sharing this around and that kind of thing, is I think it bridges the gap between our conversation earlier about the employer's role and the employee's role, right? Mm-hmm. So as the employer, you guys provided this service, right? I mean, now it's casual, somebody threw this together for your team or whatever, but I mean, nonetheless, from a corporate approved communication perspective, you guys allowed this to live on a channel somewhere. And people had the opportunity to go through this list on their own. And I won't go through the whole thing, but I'll summarize just a couple. There were things like I experienced headaches, I experienced stomach problems, stiff necks, trouble sleeping, to more serious things like I'm unable to handle my work and, things like that. They sort of seem to increase in severity as you work towards the bottom of the list. And whoever had thrown this together put together sort of a plan here that, if you have 4 checks, think about your schedule, maybe rest a little bit, consider taking a day off, that sort of thing. 4 checks, 5 checks, if you have 2 checks in sort of this severe category, maybe you should seek help, try and find a counselor, that sort of thing. And I think what this does is 2 things. I mean, one, it allows people the opportunity to sort of self-assess and maybe sort of see where they are based on this particular set of criteria. And then the second part is, I think from a corporate communication standpoint, it communicates to you, hey, you're self-assessing. And if you deem necessary that you take a couple of days off, then take a couple of days off. Like that's what this is saying to me anyway, is that I, as an employee, can look at this and make a judgment call based on this result. And this was a corporate approved communication. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So anyway, I think that this is a really cool thing. And I wonder if you just sort of talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm glad you mentioned it, because I had forgotten that's what the post was about. But yeah, this is what's so cool about like kind of time. I mean, not even purposefully trying to tie it back to remote work, but remote work requires empowering teammates. If you really want to be a successful remote company, people have to feel empowered to make decisions and move forward. And this is a great example of this. Like, this was not a corporate decision to, we didn't discuss this internally and have a meeting about it and say, should we or should we not do this? Teammates were empowered to do it. Somebody had the capability to do it. We happen to have a few people who are really interested, and have one person in particular who's got like a degree of some sort in psychology and has dealt with some of these things himself. So you're empowered to do this, make the decision and move forward with it, create this. They automated this. So every month we have some sort of check-in that pops up on everybody's twist to kind of say, hey, how are you feeling? And I think it not only empowered, somebody to move forward with doing that, the feedback on these things internally is amazing. Another one since that post, another one just popped up the other day where it had people do an exercise, an artistic exercise of drawing a picture. And there's a long explanation behind this, but it said like, hey, here's the mental health initiative of the month that we're doing. Draw a picture of a place that makes you happy. We'll just phrase it like that to keep it short. And the response to this, like when I first saw it, it wasn't something that resonated with me necessarily. I didn't feel it in that moment, but the response from the company is like, this is amazing. This was such a great activity. They're sharing their pictures that they drew and how it made them feel and what it did for their week. And so I think like one thing that really taught me is that it's one thing for us is like, if you're the leader of a company or you're a leader within a company, you can say every now and then, hey, just make sure you're taking care of your mental health, or, hey, make sure that if you need a day off, you take a day off. But that's not necessarily enough. That might be enough for one employee, but for another employee that they still may not feel comfortable dealing with that or know how to deal with that. And so I think you have to provide a couple different outlets, a couple different reminders to say like, hey, it's okay to address this in whatever way you need to. So yeah, I love that we have some teammates that like felt empowered to produce this automated system that updates people, that gives people a way to check in, and that the company supports handling that, the outcome of that, however is best for the individual.
Yeah, I love that. Well, and I think too that, it goes back to, and it's actually become kind of a drinking game this season, every time I say the word intention, but I think some it has to do with the intention, right? The fact of the matter is Doist is approaching this from the perspective of making the lives better for the people that work here, taking care of those individuals, trying to build a culture that encourages this sort of thing. And it's clear that if this sort of thing can just pop up on a channel online without any sort of, pre-approvals or being run up a chain or getting passed by HR or whatever, if these kinds of things can just exist, then it's clear to me anyway, that culture has sort of been laid down, right? It's sort of apparent that you're safe to have these kinds of discussions. I imagine if a problem arises, leadership or somebody would step in, but you're given the latitude to, push these sorts of initiatives out there. And I think, again, it goes back to this idea of intention, that, your intention isn't just to sort of pay lip service to the idea, just, oh yeah, no, take care of your mental health, blah, blah, blah. But, we have a big meeting tomorrow, so be ready for the meeting.
Yeah.
In
Exactly.
reality, it's the opposite of that. It's, if you need the time, take the time. And that's stopped. That's it. Right. And so, so I really like that. As we sort of transition this conversation, we touched on this a little bit, but sort of the worker's role in mental health, not specifically as it pertains to mental health, but sort of as it pertains to just success as a remote worker. I wonder if you'd talk a little bit about just sort of the experiences people have been going through with sort of a forced work from home type situation, and how people are, can, I guess, basically find success working remotely should they decide to go forward. I think there are a lot of people that were sort of nudged into this. And maybe over the course of the year and a bunch of YouTube videos and stuff, they figured out how to put together a little workspace. But I can't help but think there's still a lot of people doing stuff wrong. And so as a leader, or somebody who's entrenched in a remote first organization, how do you help prepare people for that type of work?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think a lot of people are like thrown into this, and then they say this is like a terrible experience. I'm not enjoying this at all. I'm less productive. I'm not happy with my partner at home, and I'm actually like, I'm craving the office. I want to go back. So yeah, doing it right is like much more important than just doing it. So I think it's good to discuss, and everybody's got their different, routines and strategies and such. But like what one word to play into your drinking game there, we both should take a sip of something, I guess, is doing it with intention is so important. Like a lot of people will just wing it. Like when you walk into an office, your first day at an office, like everything's kind of taken care of for you. You've got, people have set up ergonomic style desks, and thought's been put into the lighting and where people are located in the phone systems, and you've got multiple screens, and it's all kind of like set up for you to optimize your productivity. And often I can speak from experience, like when I started working remotely 12 years ago, and I didn't think about a system or my workspace very much, or, some days I worked from one place, some days I worked from another, and I didn't really focus too much on my routine. So I think that was just a lack of intention at the time for me, and really getting intentional and thinking about, okay, what works for me? When are my creativity hours the best? Are they in the morning or the afternoon? Do I like having calls most often in the afternoon, the morning? Do I want a long lunch break, a short lunch break? Do I like to have, do I need a dedicated co-working space, or do I kind of like bouncing around? Do I like working from home? I have some people, I know some people that love having like a 30-minute walk, back home, or a short commute helps them kind of break up, work and play, or work and home. So I think just the first step is like just being intentional about it and saying, okay, what actually is going to work best for me, and not just throwing a plastic table in the corner of the kids' playroom and expecting that you can, make it work. The other one that I love from my friend, I think a mutual friend of ours, Jesse Chambers at Workforce, is just putting on pants, which just cracked me up. He mentioned that on my podcast, but like literally just waking up every day and getting dressed and dressing for success, even if it's just a t-shirt, but maybe it's a collared shirt, whatever, but not working in your PJs has some positive benefits. And then the third thing that I want to mention, I think is super important, is figuring, and it does tie back to intentionality, but is dividing work from the rest of your life, because when those two things are in the same space, it can just become really miserable. Especially it can have an effect on your mental health. So I'm very, very intentional about keeping those two things separated. I have rules for myself, apps installed that block me from doing certain things. I leave my laptop at the office. I work from a co-working space. I have all notifications turned off on all my devices. So I block time for I put personal stuff on my calendar, on my work calendar, to keep me from scheduling stuff or meetings popping up, somebody booking something with my Calendly link during a time when I have something personal going on. So I think separating those two things is super, super important.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And I think all that intention you're talking about is, at least early on in the pandemic, is one of the things that sort of workers were robbed of. They didn't have this opportunity to be intentional about their remote work. And I think that led to a lot of floundering and a lot of mistakes and a lot of problems early on. And I think that also, trickles upwards to leadership and everybody else. Like, they had no intention of being remote, and now suddenly they are, they weren't prepared to make those decisions, right? Or they hadn't sort of had in the right spot yet. And I think most people probably rose to the occasion, but I think you're right that the intention is a big part of that. I wonder too, and maybe this will be kind of a controversial subject, but there's not a lot of people I could talk to about it that fit it as well as you do. So I wonder, and, this will be a blunt way of saying it, but is nomading bad for remote? And so the reason I wanted to ask you about it is because, again, citing your LinkedIn page, recently you posted an article, or you put up a post about how you had sort of fallen into the fact that you needed to have a routine, and that you thrived better by having sort of a daily schedule or a routine that you followed. And I think you sort of just described that, right? That sort of falls under intention, this idea of doing things for a certain reason. But I wonder, especially as people are trying to sell the idea of remote to their employers or encourage people to do things the right way, is the idea of sort of nomading actually not that good for remote in terms of how it might appeal to, corporations?
Yeah, I think unfortunately for the nomads, and I've for context, like, have done the digital nomad thing for several years and still love to travel. Travel is my passion. I have a podcast that pretty much talks about combining work and travel, but mainly about just living abroad. And so traveling's a huge part of my my core being, and what I love doing, and exploring other cultures and stuff. But it does have sort of a negative connotation in the minds of the corporate world. They see Instagram shots of people with their, cocktails and laptops sitting on a beach in Bali, and they say, well, this isn't what work's supposed to be like. And whether it is or isn't, it doesn't matter. That's their perception. So, it could taint the possibilities. And I think it has for a long time, the stereotypical shot of what a digital nomad is has tainted what remote work could be in the minds of a lot of people who are in leadership positions. The guard is changing, though. A lot of people who are moving into CEO level positions, higher up leadership company and higher up in leadership in a company, starting companies, have been there, done that, or they see the benefits that remote work has, and they see what remote work can be, and they weigh that against those options of like, well, if somebody wants to nomad, then whatever, as long as they're delivering, what do I care? So I think it might have held us back a little bit in the past, but I don't know a lot of nomads that don't also have that are successful, that don't also have a good infrastructure and intentionality around their routine. They're still really good at, the ones that are doing it successfully are really doing it with a lot of intentionality and are creating this space. They're leveraging great tools and great best practices and physical spaces like co-working spaces and co-living spaces that are emerging. So as these things are all like coming with the times and making nomading more like a more professional nomad, I guess you could say.
Yeah, no, well, and I think that makes sense, right? And it actually, the question I had here is nomading a young person's game. I wondered, for you as you're starting to get a little bit older and stuff, I was curious what sort of spurred this change. And maybe you're just talking about it publicly and, really you've been following some, form of routine for a good long time, so I don't know, but I was curious if there's something that sort of spurred the change to this idea that, of sort of settling down a little bit, or at least what might be perceived as settled versus a stereotypical nomadic life where you're moving day to day. I mean, we all work from out of town or take a laptop on vacation, but, but was there something that spurred the change, or was there something that drove you to notice that, your intentions needed to become more sharply honed if you were going to be successful?
Yeah, there were two things. So one, I'll say, like, in general, that kind of transition happened over an evolution of, I would say, like 2 years. So I went from full-time nomading, week to week and month to month, to slowing that down to 2 or 3 months, and then maybe a bit longer, and then sitting in one place for a year, but then getting itchy feet and thinking, okay, I'm going to go back to 1 month at a time, and moving around. And so the kind of fun, easy way to that I kind of jokingly say about it is, I got tired of moving my dog around, which is true. I have a 50-pound Siberian Husky who's going to be 9 years old this year, and he's like our child, my wife and I's child. And so we're kind of like, it's a pain to move a big dog around across borders and countries, and there's lots of paperwork, bureaucracy involved. And then there's just the simple thing of like finding an Airbnb host or a place that wants to host you with a wolf-like creature in the house. That your options are limited. So that really did get exhausting. And actually, it is physically why I'm still here in Valencia, in a way, because we came to Spain on a 1-year visa 3 years ago. And we said, well, we're going to go to Valencia for 3 months, and then we're going to probably go to maybe Barcelona for 3 months. But once we got settled, it was so hard finding a place that we could rent with the dog and getting comfortable and settled here. We just said, let's just stay here for the whole year, and we'll just travel around a lot in Spain. So that legitimately is what slowed us down, that kind of put the brakes on things. But I think getting back to more of what your question is really about is, when I came to work at Doist, I really realized that, Doist I used to be one of very few at a hybrid style company that was working remote. So we were not optimized for remote. When I came to Doist, I really learned a lot about being a pro at doing remote correctly. Everybody was remote. We actually have very few nomads. We have out of 100 people, 1 or 2 people that are, I wouldn't even say full-time nomading. So I learned a lot about routines, and we're also a productivity company. So I learned about productivity habits. And so all of these things kind of fused into me learning. We got co-working perks and things like that. And I started learning, okay, this is how I really optimize my remote working. I was doing it on an undergraduate level, and I kind of got into like the PhD of it when I came to work at Doist.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I like that you're talking about, I mean, in your case, it's a dog that's changed your stuff, but I think that there's this idea that, we can't easily make these changes or whatever, when the reality is it's just your dog that caused you to change.
Yeah.
It could have been a child, it could have been a marriage, it could have been a family, it could have been anything, right? And so, and I guess again, that maybe points to the perks of sort of being able to be flexible in your work, is that you have the option to speed up or slow down as it suits you.
Yeah. And it doesn't, it's not like there's a spectrum. Like it's not like a faucet that turns on and off. Like I still have itchy feet. We talk a lot about like, should we try someplace else? Like the plan has not been to be here for this long. And we do still have the desire to move around. And I love that we have the freedom to be able to make that decision, and we'll exercise that freedom again at some point for sure. But for right now, it's like, this works great for me. I've got my routine here, and I do feel I love the analogy about like the spokes on the wheel, and having all the, like, you need all the spokes on the wheel to really like live a fulfilling life. And for me, I've really started to figure that out. Like, it's not all about work. It's not all about play. It's not all about travel. It's about finding the right balance between these and feeling productive and like you're contributing at work, but also balancing that with like enjoying yourself and your social life and getting to travel some. And so everybody's, to each his own, like everybody's got to find the right spokes and the right combination for them. But it's awesome to have that flexibility to be able to figure that out and not have that dictated to you. Like, oh, here's your set of spokes. You can kind of create your own. And I think that's been a huge thing for me.
Yeah, I love that. And I think some of that probably comes a little bit with age and experience. I think, when you're young and idealistic and single and all this stuff, like, it's really easy to move around. But as you grow older and you start to develop roots and you start to put down, even if it's organizational roots, and, it does sort of change the way that you look at things. So I think that's a good observation. So one of the things I wanted to talk about here in sort of the last few minutes was this idea of, making the case for remote as we're starting to move forward. Hopefully, Lord willing, most places are starting to recover from the pandemic and they're starting to come back online a little bit. There's a lot of talk, especially here in the States, about rushing back to work or back to the office and getting back to, back to normal, whatever that means. And so there's a lot of discussion about that, but I wonder if we could talk a little bit about just sort of making that case, right? So if you happen to be in a company, like we discussed, so much of it had to do with intention, but if your boss wasn't doing it right, so the numbers didn't look good during that period of time or whatever, and they've made a horrible case for remote, yet you as an employee want to come back in some capacity, but you would like that maybe the flexibility built in or something. How can we make a case with our employers that, we'll sort of back up the business needs, but also support ourselves on sort of that personal level?
Yeah. So many people are struggling with this right now, right, Ryan? Like you've got people who are literally begging their bosses to let them stick with remote. And then you've got other people on the other end of the spectrum saying, do whatever it takes to get us back in the office in some form or another. And the employers are trying to scramble and figure this out. Like, well, how do we serve the needs of everybody? And it's probably most likely like that, this hybrid approach is the way most companies will go. And I think, God, we're going to have to take shots here soon. Doing it with intentionality is going to be super key for those that go down that route and really try to suss out the flaws that come with a hybrid approach. But I guess that's a whole nother subject. But I think what the person can do that's in those shoes is that fortunately for them, there's so much content on this right now. There's so many reports being produced about how remote work can be implemented. And I think really selling this point that pandemic remote is not what remote has to be going forward. I was meeting with someone recently at a fairly big firm who was sharing this, they're in leadership at the company, and they're trying to figure out how they're going to do remote after the pandemic. And they're sort of envisioning that it's just a continuation of what they've been doing, which was just a scrambled ad hoc approach to trying to make remote work, going from all the time in the office to no time in the office, all in the matter of a couple of weeks. And so I was talking with him about, what you have to do now is you have to back up and figure out what works for you. And you have to look at the tools that you're using and the processes and the best practices. And so if you're trying to sell that to your organization, then I think starting there and saying, hey, what we've been doing doesn't have to be what what this actually is. Here's examples, here's reports, here's companies that are making this work, and here's the data to back up how it can actually benefit you, the employer. I also think there's a lot to be said for pushing for like a pilot project. So I know some people that are pushing their employers to allow them to continue working remote, and they're using a pilot project as a way to do that. So, hey, give me 3 months or 6 months working in this way with this group of people, and let's see if it works. And then maybe it can benefit the company on a grander scale to expand it. But at least we'll know. So there's a couple different approaches. I think the great thing though is that there's just tons of content out there on this right now, and you can make a case for anything if you really want to.
Yep. Well, and again, I think intention is the name of the game, right? I mean, it's making sure that people are doing it. Not only you, if you're requesting it of a leader or of a company, you not only is your intention in the right place, you're not looking for a way to work less or just cut out early, go, take long lunches or whatever it is. It's not an abuse. Rather, you're doing it because you think it can actually improve the situation. And then as an employer, how can this actually improve our business or make retention better or whatever? One of the things that has been really bumping me during sort of this recovery phase of the pandemic is this idea of getting back to the new normal. This idea, I think, for me anyway, pays a lot of, or is sort of a disservice to people who've suffered for the last year. And it's one of the things that I think, I'm starting to hear people speaking about. In fact, recently you shared a thing from Simon Sinek who talked about this a little bit. But the idea is that, basically everybody is returning to the office traumatized. Everybody has lost a friend, has been sick themselves, has lost a family member, or endured somebody's long-term sickness, or simply was isolated and has slipped into sort of a low-grade depression or something. Everybody's got their things. And to just sort of sweep all that under the rug and to say, no, we're going back to normal. Now you can just work 40 hours a week in the office again. It's easy, just like old times. I think that is paying a real disservice to the suffering that people have endured during this thing. And so I think it's really important, again, that you act intentionally, especially as an employer, that you try and address the needs you can, right? Obviously you're just a business, you can only do so much, but do what you can. And I think a lot of the things that you're mentioning that Doist is up to, I think sort of scratch those itches.
Yeah, I'm glad it seems that way. Like I said, we're trying to figure it out as well, and just constantly evolving and learning from others. I mentioned this earlier, but I've learned from the people that you've talked to on this show, and the people who share content in the networks that you and I are in, about how things are being done at different companies. And there's just so much to learn, and it can always be done better, I think. And so as long as we're all kind of like constantly working towards that, this is a great point that you're making about not trying to just return to this. What is this new normal? What does that mean? And really thinking through that. And if in the end, you're always, as a leader and as those of you that are listening, and, if you have a company or you're transitioning a company to remote, if you're always putting the individuals back at the forefront of the conversation and your team, and optimizing for them and their well-being, then I think in the end, the score kind of takes care of itself. And so that's kind of what we believe. And I think what we try to, show in our actions and the way we communicate to the team. But, it's always good to learn from the other companies out there that are doing this, and pick their brains and apply it to what we can here at Doist.
Yep, I think that's right. Always be learning, right? So in these last couple of minutes, I wondered if you wanted to just talk a little bit about your new podcast, sort of what the inspiration was to start doing a show and what you're doing with it. And maybe we can drive some people your way.
That's great, man. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the plug. I will take that hook and run with it. It was a passion project for me. So I've spent a lot of time over my life living in different countries and exploring different cultures for short periods of time, long periods of time. And along the way, one of my favorite things to do is just sit down with other expats, people who really were like building lives for themselves. I'm also very interested in the nomad life. And like I said, I've done that too, bouncing around from place to place. And, but what I really, really love doing is talking with people who are like deeply ingrained in cultures, and not just like for the fun side of it, but also I'm kind of a nerd for the pragmatic, like how did you do that? Like, how is it you can live in Japan as a guy from Germany? Like, how does that work? Is there a visa? Because these are challenges I've faced. And then in the circles that I'm in socially, a lot of people are facing those as well. So yeah, the idea was just to kind of take those conversations that I'm having anyway and then parlay them into a podcast. I was also, as remote work was becoming more of like a normal thing, I was getting lots of messages on various platforms, email, LinkedIn, otherwise, saying like, hey, I got a remote work job now and I want to move to Spain, or I want to move. I know you spent some time in Ecuador. How do I go to Ecuador? And I thought, like, what's the best way for me to not keep regurgitating myself in a written form? Why don't I just talk about it? Because I'm a better talker than I am a writer, I guess. So I'll go, that's the path of least resistance. So that's kind of where it all started. And it's been super fun. Just finished season 1 and I'm recording season 2 now. And it's been a blast.
That's awesome. The show is called About Abroad, right?
Correct. Yeah. About Abroad, aboutabroad.com is the website. And then it's available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and anywhere you get your podcasts, as we like to say.
Excellent. Well, so any last parting shots? How can people get in touch with you if they want to connect with Doist or see what you're doing at work? How's the best way to get in touch or get connected with you?
Yeah. So the company is Doist, Doist, often pronounced Doist, but it is Doist. Doist.com is the website where you can access most of the information about about the company itself, and our 2 main products are Twist and Todoist, twist.com and todoist.com. I would also I would love to plug our blog. I don't play a huge part in our blog. I contribute occasionally, but our content team does a phenomenal job on all things related to remote work, teamwork. It's productivity. So if a lot of the things we touched on here, including mental health, you'll find on the Doist blog. So you can check that out from Doist.com. I'm most easily accessible on LinkedIn at Chase Warrington. You can find me there, and at aboutabroad.com for the podcast.
Cool. Well, thanks so much, Chase. I really appreciate this, man. It's been kind of a long time coming. I think it's been almost 2 years since I spoke to you last. Well, I guess a year and a half or whatever.
Wow.
It was early 2020 when I spoke to you the first time, and I had the opportunity to meet you in the first place. And so really grateful to sort of come full circle, have you on the show, and Lord willing, maybe we'll see you in Spain this summer or in the fall.
I really hope so. And I really appreciate you having me. I can't believe it had been that long, but I've loved following along your podcast. I actually do listen, and I appreciate what you're doing. And it's been really fun here today. So thanks for shedding some light on some of these subjects, and yeah, keep it up.
Absolutely. And thanks so much to everybody who tunes into the podcast this week and every week. We'll see you all next time. I don't owe you anything.